Growing up biracial, mixed, mulatto, half black, half white, it's interesting because you kind of get a blend of both in terms of how you're perceived. But what's funny is that from an early age, obviously you're a baby and you're just coming into the world, and so your senses are just going off of what you're seeing in front of you, what your parents are putting in front of you, just the random chance of the place you were born. So you're not taking in these concepts of race or a family unit or a school system. You're not taking in any of that. So you're just you. You're just what you perceive from your eyes, your ears, your mouth, your nose, your skin. You're just sensory. You're just like in the moment of things as a little kid. When you go to school, you have your friends. So when I was growing up, having a friend that was white or a friend that was black or a friend that was Mexican, a friend that was Asian, it's just my friend from school. There's no distinction on that. So it's just like, oh, we go over to each other's houses and play games. We go to school and take these tests that we don't really know why we're taking, but we're just here and we're taking them. And we go outside for recess and we play, and then we go back in like, oh, he cut me in line, and then you're mad about it because like you're just like a kindergartner and someone cut you, so you feel like they like cut your place, and it doesn't matter if they're like white, black, Asian, Mexican, just like that kid cut me in line, or we were playing dodgeball and he threw it and hit me too hard, or just like, you know, like kids keep it very simple. But then you grow up and the world tells you that no, you are a white person, or you are a black person, you are a Mexican, you are an Asian, whatever the nationality is, or just religion, culture, height, whatever the distinction is on that, the world tells you. So it's funny because growing up, I never considered myself a mixed race man with green eyes. I'm just myself. I'm just Mason, right? There's no anything. And then, but when the world reinforces that, and your life is actually affected by it, and you start seeing the trajectory of your friends and people you grew up with and family members and other people around you, you notice that not everybody gets the same results, and not everybody is treated the same, not everybody's looked at the same. So you're sort of forced to take it into account. So it's very interesting because being half black and half white, you kind of fit in with everybody to a certain extent, because you kind of you have family on both sides. You're able to blend with both. You're able to integrate yourself with both fairly easily, but at the same time, you don't fit in too well with either. So like you fit in with everybody, and you don't fit in with everybody. So like you belong everywhere, and you also belong nowhere. So you're all inclusive, but then you're constantly a nomad at the same time. So it's like a very interesting mix, because then there's like the whole you're unique looking thing, but it's only perspective. Like if everybody was mixed race with green eyes, you would just think the white guy was exotic. If everybody was mixed race with green eyes, you'd think the black guy was exotic. It's only because those are predominant that the minority would be mixed with green eyes, so that's the exotic thing. Or like if everyone was Asian, the one Mexican would be exotic. If everyone was Mexican, the one Asian would be exotic. It's just by perspective of that group and just like what's going on at a certain time. So it's very interesting growing up that way, and seeing the differences from kid to adult, because as a kid I never really had to contemplate being mixed race. Like, yeah, like maybe you're 10 years old and your friend like once will just be like, hey, you have darker skin, and it's like, hey, you have lighter skin, or if they're black, like, hey, you have lighter skin, and I'm like, hey, he has darker skin, you know. But it's like it's very petty, and it's very not relevant until the world teaches you that it's relevant, until it's beaten into your head to think about it. Like, I have to acknowledge it now because it's just like the world basically forces you to acknowledge it, which is very interesting in how that plays out. Like even getting a modeling contract and like making a little bit of extra money that way, I'm sort of forced to acknowledge it, because if it's paying your bills, if it's helping you pay food, and you're getting a result that someone else is not getting, it sort of forces you to contemplate it and to analyze the reasons behind it. Where at the end of the day, it doesn't really mean anything. It's not a big deal. In the big picture sense, it's very meaningless, but in the day-to-day sense of how it affects our circumstance and how we're interacting with each other, it's very relevant. So it's interesting to kind of balance the two, like the big picture sense and then the small picture, and then the bigger meaning, and then just the day-to-day trivial stuff. And it's interesting to see both, because I've always been very social myself, Even like growing up and going through high school, I was student body president my senior year. I did the morning announcements. I was like friends with like every group. I had friends that did sports. I had friends that did band. I had friends that were very social, friends that were not social. I never really stuck to one group. I just never saw that, even at an early age too. Like I went to a Catholic school from preschool through 12th grade, but even then I never like identified myself as being a Catholic. I've always been very cerebral in the sense of just like, I'm just talking to this person regardless of who they are, and I just don't like follow this belief system that somebody just puts there. To me, it's just like you feel the vibe of the interaction and just like what's going on. I've never really looked too deeply into someone's religion or someone's race growing up. I mean, obviously you recognize it. Like I can see that someone has like black skin or white skin, but it's not until you get older, until you're an adult, when real aspects of like survival kick in, and the economy and how people are treated. When you're just a kid and your parents are taking care of everything, it's easy to just not really think about it because you're just going over to a friend's house to sleep over and his parents are taking care of him, your family's taking care of you, so it's just you don't think about it. But growing up, now that we're individuals and you kind of get to a certain age where people don't have sympathy for you anymore because you're old enough to have lost your innocence and to realize things, so now you have to realize things. So being mixed, it's very interesting because I see certain benefits of it, kind of like the light skin privilege, and then I also see certain disadvantages from it. Like I was saying before, where you're kind of all-inclusive, where you hit a lot of points from a broad spectrum of people, but then sometimes you're so unique or you stand out so much that you don't really fit in anywhere. So you kind of like, you fit in everywhere, but you also fit in nowhere. And how does that interplay with your life moves? Because if people are having a certain perception of you, then obviously that affects you. So you have to tailor your life moves to that because you have to pay bills, you have to survive, you have to get to the next day in this world. So if other people's opinions affect you, you have to take note of it, even if it's very silly. Like even just talking about it, going on a video about this, about a skin color, about at the end of the day, thinking about it, it's like your parents have sex and you're created. So just even having a conversation on it is very funny because it's so like random chance. It's so just like doesn't really even matter, but it does matter in another way. So it's very ironic and contradictory, but we're all ironic beings. We're all ironic humans. We all contradict ourselves. Life in itself is a huge contradiction because any opinion or thought you could have or action you could do, it contradicts itself in another way. Or like an opinion you have or why someone is doing something right or wrong, they're probably having that opinion of you. And in like your actions, like your way of coming up in the world could be someone else's way of going down, or like your way of going down is someone else's way up. So like trying to balance all of this is very hard and it's challenging, and it's especially challenging when people aren't open to the conversation, because when people are closed off and when people don't want to tackle the deeper subjects, then it makes it harder for everyone to grow. And it's understandable because life is tricky and it's complicated, and people have a different level of understanding, and people's skin is not as thick as somebody else, and certain things trigger other people that don't trigger another group of people, and some people are more easily offended by things. So trying to make sense of what's going on here, it can be very difficult because you don't know what you do or say, and you don't know how that's going to affect someone. And even just going back to just being mixed race, like I don't even have to say something to someone, just my existence, my form could affect someone based on their past experiences. Like they could experience something or a situation with somebody, and then they lump that person or that group as to like every other person. So like someone has a bad experience with like a white guy or a black guy, and they think the whole race is like that because they had that experience with that person. Or like you have an experience with a woman, and so now it causes your opinion of other women to change because you had that experience with that woman. And so it's hard to know when you're in the wrong, when you're in the right. It's very tricky. I think it really comes down to introspection. It comes down to actually looking yourself in the mirror and knowing, okay, who am I? How am I perceived? What is my path? What am I giving? What am I taking? How does this form, how does this avatar that I've taken here in this world, how does this impact other people? And what can I do with this form to make some kind of sense of what's going on. Being biracial is it's interesting, especially now in 2020. I was born in '94, so being in the year 2020 now, we're definitely at a point where it's more accepted in a way, because being modeling, doing modeling now, if this was like 1940, I would just be like lumped into like being black, because it's kind of like dropping a drop of ink in a glass of milk, where like the whole glass just turns black, because like that's how it was perceived. Like, oh, you have some black, you're just all black. Like there's no distinction. It's like if you're not a pure white, then you're black, or you're like the other group. And so just based on time period, that could affect so many things. Like a lot of these people today, that they'll get jealous or envious of someone because of like if they look at like a pro athlete, like look at how much money he's making, that's not fair, I have to work. Well, take that black pro athlete 100 years ago, would that be his position? He'd be in a worse position than the person getting jealous. But they're not taking into account time period or understanding, or just letting the other guy win once in a while. Like, it's not just all about like your money, your success, like your happiness, your life. Sometimes it's just about like the other person being the winner. And that's one thing people have a hard time too, is as we're always trying to seek balance, and we all want things, and we want to do better, and we don't want to get the short end of the stick, and we want to make things as fair as possible. But sometimes people just have a hard time with the other guy being the winner, the other person having the thing that they don't have. And it comes back to, like I said, is the lack of introspection. I don't think a lot of people have really taken the time to look at their own race, to look at their gender, to look at their height, to look at their bone structure, their genetics, where they came from, the religion they were taught, the parents they had, the home situation they had, and how that affects their psychology, how certain experience shaped them to the present day. Like me, I had a single mom growing up, and my mom's white, my dad's black, and through growing up, you realize why certain things happened the way they did, and you don't understand things as a little kid, as you're making sense of it and going through the world in a circumstance you didn't choose. But then you can look back on it as an adult, and nobody's at fault. Like, a lot of stuff happens, and there's no party to blame. There's no one force in the world to blame, because even where your parents were at a certain time, there's several years leading up to their circumstance at that point. Centuries and centuries of just human history leading up to their circumstance that caused certain things to happen, which is why you're in your circumstance. So you can't really put too much blame on anything. But going back to that, I got to take note of how that affects me. Like, growing up with a single mom, as an adult, you have to look back and be like, okay, how does that affect how I view things? How does that affect my actions, my thoughts, my words, where I'm at in life, what I'm doing? And you have to really be conscious of it, because growing up with a single mom that's white, if I grew up with my dad who's black, my whole being might be different. I would be the same person, but maybe the way I talk would be different. Growing up with a white mom, in white America, that could play to a certain advantage, because maybe I go to a job interview where it's customer service, which I've had customer service jobs, working at a hotel, and other things. Maybe me being well-spoken gives me the advantage in a certain sense, whereas a guy from the inner city, if he applies for that same customer service job at a high-end hotel, well, he was born in the inner city, so just going into the interview, he talks ghetto, he talks black, the impression, he might be better than me, he might be way more talented than me, he might be way more qualified than me. But me growing up with a white mom, I have that tendency to be around white people a little bit more often, so I'm more well-spoken. Maybe I get the job. And those are deep concepts that you have to understand. So growing up biracial, I've never considered myself white or black. I've never really contemplated it until I got older, when the world basically forces you to recognize it.